Welcome to the NBCPA Black History Month podcast series. Today, we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Chief Crown Prosecutor for London South, Lionel Idan. Lionel was called to the bar in 1996 before joining the CPS in 2005 as a rape and domestic abuse specialist. In 2007, Lionel was appointed as a District Crown Prosecutor before being promoted in 2009 to Senior District Crown Prosecutor, where he was responsible for one of the 6 districts in London. During this period in time, Lionel was the Pan-London lead for domestic abuse and for the Olympics in 2012. He was also appointed a Disclosure Gateway Reviewer. In 2014, Lionel acted as the Deputy Chief Crown Prosecutor for CPS London and was recognised in the CPS London Area Awards for Outstanding Contribution. In 2015, Lionel was appointed to Deputy Chief Crown Prosecutor for the West Midlands, where he led the successful rollout of transforming summary justice across the region. Between 2016 and 2018, whilst overseeing the region's complex casework and RASO units, Lionel also led the National Cross-Government Agency project on domestic abuse. In 2019, Lionel spent some time as the Deputy Head of the National Specialist Fraud Division, before in 2020 being appointed as the Chief Crown Prosecutor for London South, making him the first black male in the history of the CPS since its inception in 1986 to ever hold the post of CCP. Lionel, thank you for joining us today. Can I ask you, what does Black History Month mean to you?
I think it's such an important month, Nathan, and thank you for that introduction. Very kind of you. But for me, it's so significant because, firstly, it's obviously a time to celebrate achievement, to celebrate our history, the rich, diverse history and heritages that we have as Black people, to celebrate contributions that Black people have made to society and the world at large. And the importance of that for me, if you look at the media, if you look at the sphere in which we operate, criminal justice, we tend to come across a lot of negative stereotypes and misconceptions. So it's a time to almost turn that narrative on its head and showcase some of the positive images and achievements of Black people. But also for me, it's also a time to reflect, because lest we forget, there are many who have come before us, who have fought for freedoms that we take for granted now, that we can pick schools that we want to go to, that we can sit on the bus wherever we want, that we can vote. These are freedoms that were hard fought by others, by Black people before us. So for me, it's also a time to reflect on that, lest we forget, and to raise awareness of issues that still prevail in society today: racism, inequality, the need for justice. These are all important topics that I think, for me, Black History Month helps us to shine a spotlight on. So it's both significant in terms of its celebration, but also very poignant, a time for us to raise awareness, because of course, through awareness can change come around. So that really is what it, in a nutshell, stands for me.
Thanks, Lionel. And following on from that, this year's Black History Month theme is time for change, action, not words. What does that look like for you as a person of colour?
What an important theme for this year. And if you look back, 2 years ago, 2020, the murder of George Floyd, we had a huge upsurge of interest, a spotlight on race, conversations, listening exercises, and so forth. But actually, 2 years on, what has happened? And for me, what a poignant theme. That to me is what it symbolises. What have we actually achieved in 2 years? Was it just lip service, empty words, or was it something more, a catalyst for change? So for me, when we talk about a time for change, when we talk about actions, not words, have we walked the talk, essentially? Have we done things to make a difference? And that for me is what it encapsulates. So if you take my role, whether it's my national hate crime role, and some of the things I've done in my small way, I started with some conversations last year with community groups, but I've translated that into action. having joint conversations with the police, with actions to improve, break down barriers. That for me symbolises much more than just talk. So how we come together, whether you're black, white, whatever colour you are, whatever your background, how we come together to turn words from 2 years ago into action as a time to remember, to pause, to take stock and see whether or not we've made tangible inroads. That for me is what it stands for. And if we haven't, and I think we all accept there's so much more to be done, that we use this month, this Black History Month, as a springboard to do even more with our allies on our own. But I think that's a responsibility that for me sits with all of us. So for me, a time for change, actions, not words, it's literal meaning. We've got to do more than just pay lip service.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that completely. Lionel, as the only black male Chief Crown Prosecutor in the history of the service, would you say that you have a personal responsibility to progress equality and diversity within the CPS?
And I'd go further than that. I would say I actually have an absolute duty to do that. It's not just a responsibility, it's a duty. I have to. And, I always remember when we talk about the importance of equality or diversity, and just take diversity for a moment. One of the reasons I joined the CPS, I remember the office in East London, anyone who worked there, it was one of the most rich and diverse offices I've ever come across. And that's what attracted me to join the CPS. Not necessarily what we do per se, but the diversity there. And when you see the incredible benefits of diversity, where people can bring their true selves to work, where they have opportunities open to everyone, you cannot help but be a champion, a voice for that. On the flip side, you row back 20 years ago where we had the Denman report, which exposed issues around inequality and lack of diversity. You can see the damaging effects of that. So as a member of the CPS, as a senior leader within the CPS, it is my absolute duty to champion these issues, to make sure that we progress the equality and diversity agenda. And if you take my area, for example, again, in my own small way, how heavily I've invested in our people. I've created a future managers program, trying to create opportunities for others, pass on knowledge and experience and practical hints and tips. That to me is part of my duty, but it's also my responsibility to talk about these issues, to promote equality and diversity, because if not, we're the poorer for it, whether as a society, whether as an organisation. So yes, I see it as not just a responsibility, but a duty that I'm duty-bound to take forward.
Thank you. Lionel, at the beginning of our conversation, we heard a little bit about your career journey. What would you say is the biggest barrier that you've had to overcome?
Oh dear. I wouldn't necessarily describe my journey as having one major barrier. I think probably the best way of looking at it is a hurdles race or walk, where I've had various hurdles that I've either had to jump over or, pull up, run back, and then run forward, pull back, and then jump over them. So it's more been a hurdles race. And I think it was, I was very flattered to hear you read out my biography and so on. But, not many people realise that I was also the first black male Deputy Chief Crown Prosecutor. And I mention that because how much do we shine a spotlight on the achievements of our BME staff, of our BME managers? Do we recognise their achievements so that when they're spoken about in a way that promotes them, that helps them in their careers and their journeys? These are things which I think over the course of time I have faced. You look at my career as a level E, a role that you're in at the moment. I had, over the course of 3 years, 4 deputy chiefs who came in above me and some went on to be promoted. And, my career, I felt, was perhaps stunted as a result. So I've had many hurdles. And, if my story ever serves as an example of something, I hope would be perseverance, that, you can get there, but it's how you pick yourself up off the floor when you come across these failures. So I've had many hurdles that maybe if we have more time one day, I can certainly share with you, but nothing that I would say cannot be overcome. And certainly sitting here now, perhaps I'm proof that you can overcome those hurdles in time. But I think recognition, shining a spotlight, giving opportunities to our Black and ethnic minority staff is absolutely fundamental. And that's something I champion in my area, from the smallest act of achievement right through to the headline grabbing things. I make sure that I try and promote those things so that somebody one day, when they're promoted, nobody asks, where do they come from and what have they achieved and why? People know who they are.
Brilliant. And Lionel, finally, who inspires you?
Oh dear, that's so many people, Nathan, from my parents, obviously, right through to many of my peers and colleagues, even the first paralegal officer who had the courage of her convictions to send me a brief, even though I wasn't in a preferred set, right through to just in May, I invited Doreen Lawrence, Baroness Lawrence, to come and speak to our staff in London. So inspirational, hearing her struggles, hearing her journey trying to achieve justice for her son, Stephen. Incredible. And to be able to ask her questions and to be able to hear about what kept her going, absolutely inspirational. And if nobody's ever heard Doreen Lawrence speak, please do listen to her story. If ever you're going through a difficult time or you want that strength of character to persevere, she is an example. So there's so many people, but I suppose on that question, there are probably 4 events or occasions or people or things that, however you want to look to, that have been poignant moments for me in my journey, in my life. And I remember this was way back in the late 80s when the first 3 Black MPs were ever elected, Paul Boateng, Diane Abbott, Bernie Grant. And I just remember as a young person, I wasn't really into politics, but I just remember thinking 3 Black people, houses of power, there's something very significant about that. So I always remembered that. And of course, you row back now to 2022, just 2 weeks ago, the 3 great offices of state, Chancellor, Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, positions now held by BME people. In fact, 2 Black males, one of Ghanaian origin, Chancellor of the Exchequer. So there were so many inspirational moments in my career, but that's one in the political world that has always stayed with me. The other, I remember I'd just become, I qualified at the bar, but I couldn't get pupillage, and I was struggling to get pupillage. I'd sent 90 letters plus to different chambers, hadn't got responses, just rejections. And I remember hearing the story from John Roberts, QC, the first Black African male QC in England and Wales. And he talked about how he had walked around the inns for so long trying to give out his CV, never got pupillage, and how in the rain one day he had helped somebody change their flat tire. That person turned out to be the head of chambers, and that's how he got pupillage. And I was going through a difficult time, and I remember that was an inspirational moment, and it kept me going, and I kept applying. And I always remember the story of John Roberts. He said when he became head of chambers, he made sure that his chambers was like the colours of the rainbow. He had literally every race within his chambers. So going back to your earlier question about equality and diversity, it's an inspirational moment for me. And then I think the third, I said of 4, was I'd been a level D, I'd been promoted my first ever leadership role. And I think I was about a year in, so it's about 2008. And of course, Obama was elected. And I remember my team were all saying, yes, we can, yes, we can. And it was a really euphoric moment. I never dreamt I'd ever be a CCP, I can tell you that now. But I just remember that moment of hope, that moment of possibility, that anything is possible. And that was one moment of inspiration that stayed with me, and euphoria and hope. And I've always remembered that throughout my career. But I think if there is a figure, if you press me over and above all these moments that I never really realized, like as a young child, I remember my father trying to talk to me about South Africa and apartheid and segregation, and I couldn't really grasp what that meant, that I can't go to the same school as my friends and I can't go to the same swimming pool and so forth. But I just always remember throughout, he played the black and white, anyone can watch it now, speech of Nelson Mandela when he was being sentenced in his traditional South African gear, making this impassioned speech. And again, I never really understood the symbolism or grasped that, but That's a towering figure. As I've gone through my leadership journey, that I've come to understand and appreciate what the man stood for. You know, when we talk about courage of your convictions, when we talk about servitude, which to me embodies leadership, servitude to others, that truly is somebody who embodies that. And, you know, if you say to people, Nelson Mandela, nobody says, oh, the man who won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993, or, you know, everyone remembers the struggle. He gave up, the self-sacrifice. He had a career as a lawyer. He gave all of that up to spend 40 years of his best life in prison for freedoms that people now take for granted. And of course, from the anger, the young, passionate man transitioning to this elder statesman with dignity who brought people together upon his release. I mean, what an inspirational journey, what an inspirational story. And again, people forget he only served one term as president, one term. Many of these leaders you tend to see cling on to power. He didn't. You know, what a lesson. You see other leaders who sometimes manipulate these ideals for their own self-grandiose or aggrandizement or self-promotion. He never did that. And it's a huge lesson for anyone, in my view, who's embarking on a leadership career. You know, look at that man. And he always said this, Nathan, you know, don't judge me on my successes. Judge me on the many times I fell and picked myself up. So while I'm very flattered that you read out my biography, I hope, you know, in my small way, like the great man, that I can be judged one day, not on all the things that have been mentioned, but those times when I've fallen over, picked myself up, persevered. And that to me is the inspiration I take from him. And a little factual nugget for all of you, I happen to share the same birthday as the great man. So maybe in my small way, that is my connection to him, but a hugely inspirational figure. And certainly my journey as a leader, something that I've come to learn about, having the courage of your convictions, self-sacrifice, doing the right thing, even in the face of insurmountable challenges and pushback, doing the right thing, and having that dignity and courage to bring people together. An amazing man.
Brilliant, brilliant. Lionel, thank you for your time today and for your insights and responses to our questions. We really appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me.